Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this session today. My name is Sally Radwan, and I'm the coordinator of Egypt's AI strategy. And it's my pleasure today to introduce you to one of the projects that we're really excited about. In Egypt, we have a very strong focus on AI for development, which is deploying AI technologies for areas that will really help Egypt's development goals in areas such as agriculture, healthcare, water management, economic planning, infrastructure, and so on. And today we're particularly proud to present this project in water management and for its use in agriculture. So let me make sure that my presentation is up so I can show it to you. So the presentation is really a very short introduction of the project, and it's hopefully just a conversation opener for what we could talk about in terms of the project and what it's achieved. So we call it AI4water, smart irrigation. We hope to find a better name soon. But for now, it's just a pilot, so we're going with that name. And this is a partnership between, as you can see, 4 entities: the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology in Egypt, the Ministry of Agriculture also in Egypt, and then 2 companies, Esri and Microsoft. And we're particularly proud of that public-private partnership model, and we'll talk about it a little bit in the presentation because we think it's going to be a really viable model for AI applications, especially in development. Right, so without further ado, let me give you some background. Egypt, like many countries nowadays, is starting to face quite an alarming water shortage, and also a focus on sustainable development and on clean energy and on making sure that resources are utilized to the best way possible and not wasted. And so we have quite a few initiatives to try and rationalize the use of water and also to make sure that waste is minimized. Unfortunately, the agricultural sector in Egypt is one of the biggest wasters of water. We spend around 77% of our entire water allocation on agriculture and irrigation. So it's quite a lot of opportunity, I think, for fixing things. And this is where this project came from, really. It's to see how we can deploy technology in rationalizing the use of water in agriculture. Now, the project description is actually quite simple. The problem statement is the following. Egypt has quite a lot of agricultural land, but the problem is it's very fragmented. So you see very small plots, often just a couple of acres that are planted in some sort of crop, say rice. Then there will be another plot right next to it planting something completely different. And due to the shortage of lack of use of technology, these are irrigated in more or less the same way, and usually irrigated by flooding them with too much water, which sometimes damages the soil, but also definitely doesn't optimize water usage and doesn't optimize crop growth as well. And so what we are trying to achieve with this project is to calculate the precise amount of water that is needed for each of these small agricultural plots. They constitute, I think, just over 75% of all agricultural plots in the country, so it's quite a lot. And they're owned often by small farmers who can't afford technology. Whereas in larger plots, people are able, either individual owners or indeed companies, are able to deploy large-scale technologies and rationalize the use of water and optimize crop yield and so on. But here we're trying to help the really small farmer who can't afford basically any type of technology. So what we're doing is we're doing a number of things actually that are nice byproducts of this application. So let me see, I hope these images are clear. The first thing that we need to do, first we rely on satellite images to take high resolution pictures of any agricultural piece of land. We've actually launched a pilot in an area called Sidi Salim in the Nile Delta. And it was a suitable area because it is one that has so many fragmented plots with many different types of crops. But it's also a relatively easily accessible area where we can collect data. And the first step of the project is really to detect the boundaries of those agricultural plots, because as I said, they're often very small, very hard to distinguish from one another. So we built a deep learning model that is able to, with quite high accuracy, delineate these plots from each other, so to identify the boundaries of each one. And that itself is quite a useful application for Egypt, because we've never had those types of statistics of how big each plot is and where the delineation is between the different plots. And then comes the next stage, which is, okay, so now we've identified this plot, what exactly is happening there? What types of crops are they planting, and also what stage, because the amount of water that you need is also determined by the stage of growth of your specific crop. And so the next stage is to try and use techniques like spectral image analysis to try and identify the type of crop. So is this rice, is this wheat, is this corn? And then also the stage of growth, so that among other things, and interpolating it with different types of data sources, we can also determine what kind of water or what amount of water it needs. So this was, again, a very interesting byproduct of this project, because it helps us build a pretty detailed agricultural map of Egypt, and it helps us with planning crops for the different, for next season, for example, and then also match supply and demand, match that with market pricing, and so on. So it has quite a few, we haven't even reached the level of calculating the amount of water yet, but we're generating all these byproducts, which are quite interesting. And then, so this is a little bit more detail about the algorithm, the deep learning model that we're using for boundary detection. Like I said, it's piloted in an area in the Nile Delta that is characteristic for having so many small plots next to each other. One problem that often happens there is that the delineation of these plots relied on manual entry of data. So you would go to the farmers and you would ask them where their plot began and ended, which is, of course, the minute you start entering manual data, you have lots and lots of problems with fraud, with inaccuracies, with errors in data entry, with data not being updated frequently enough, and so on and so forth. So there was nowhere near a comprehensive database of these boundaries between the different plots, and this project has helped generate it, which is quite useful for many different types of planning purposes. This is the machine learning model for crop detection. Like I said, it's a combination of remote sensing and deep learning technologies, where we're able to define or determine not only the type of crop, but also the stage of its current growth. The next stage after that is once you have these details, you then interpolate them with other data points. Like, for example, if you're able to put sensors in the ground, you can measure the soil moisture and salinity, for example, and things like that. You can also interpolate it with weather data and forecast the weather for the next few days and see if there's likely to be rain or if it's going to be excessively hot or dry. Then you might need to irrigate. And then based on all of that, we're creating quite an elaborate machine learning model that is calculating the precise amount of water and also the different intervals and the frequency of when we need to irrigate. So when and by how much. And this is already proving very useful for some of these smallhold farmers who are really, like I said, unable to deploy any kind of technology to help them. And then the next stage of this project, which is not on here, but is actually already in the planning phase, we are building a smart assistant for farmers. It's a mobile app that can also run on WhatsApp because many of these farmers don't have access to high-end smartphones that are able to run native apps very efficiently. So we're building a chatbot-based virtual assistant that will help them in many areas, including things like, once we have this insight about how much do you need to irrigate, when do you need to irrigate, we then know your location, we know which one your plot is, and then we send you that information to your mobile phone to show you or to alert you when you're supposed to irrigate. But we also give you information and advice on, is this the best crop type that you should be planting now, from a weather perspective, from a supply and demand perspective, from a pricing perspective, from a resourcing perspective, and so on. We also help you estimate your crop yield for next year. We help you detect the current spot prices in the market, and sometime a little bit of a later phase is also connecting people on the app so they can trade crops right away and eliminate the middleman who sometimes takes, or quite often actually takes, most of the margin away from the small farmer. We provide information such as advice on pests. So if you're suspecting a certain type of pest, or if one of your plants is infected, you can take a picture of it, upload it to the machine learning model, and it will give you advice on what type of pest this is and how you can fight it. So you can spot spray instead of blanket spraying and not damage your entire crop, but really fight the specific pest you're suffering from. Same as the use of fertilizers, where you can also determine the exact type of fertilizer that you need to use to optimize your crop yield. And then hopefully at a later stage as well, we'll be able to deploy, like I said earlier, sensors on the ground to get even more details on ground salinity and the health of the soil, so that you can optimize your crop yield even more. So this is the project in a nutshell, where we've just finished the pilot phase, and we're starting to roll out the project across all of Egypt. It would probably take a few years, but we are starting the full deployment. And it's also a learning experience that we're keen to share with our friends and neighbors in African and in Arab countries, and we've actually started 2 working groups on AI on the African Union level and on the Arab level, where we're sharing these kinds of experiences and knowledge, and hopefully we can also partner on rolling out these types of projects across the different countries. That's all I have to say. I hope you're interested. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them either now or later on. You can find me on the virtual platform, or if you want to get in touch later on. Thank you very much for listening. Okay, so I can see a question. In what way has the data analysis you conducted through your project led to concrete changes for farming practices so far? It's a little bit early to talk about widespread changes, but I think at least the rationalization of water usage and the ability to not waste that much water, which means expense even for the farmer, not even talking about sustainability issues, that's been highly appreciated by them. I hope that we'll start to see, as the project is deployed at a larger scale, that we're able to see the economic impact of it on crop yields and on water usage, but also a bit of a change of behavior on the farmer's side as well. And as you said, um, a change of farming practices, hopefully also combined with this virtual assistant that we're talking about. But this is, the project has, we've just literally finished the pilot two months ago, so it's early to talk about very concrete changes in farming practices, I think. The next question, do you find infrastructural barriers when implementing this initiative? If yes, how did you overcome these? And what lessons does provide if this project is potentially scaled up? Oh, challenges. There were all sorts of challenges, starting from data gathering, because we had to do quite a lot of manual data gathering at first to check the accuracy of our machine learning models. So we had to, in this small area, we had to make sure that we had the right delineation of plotlands. We had to make sure that we had accurate crop data, again, type of crop, but also stage of growth. And we couldn't rely on farmers to just give us this information because, like I said, lots of issues with, mistrust and fraud, and this is still a pilot, so no one has heard of it, no one understands what it's supposed to do, and there's potential for fraud as well, and potential for mistakes when entering data. And honestly, farmers are quite busy and don't really have time to provide data that they don't see the reason for. So we had to deploy people on the ground to go collect this data manually, which came with its own set of challenges because we started around the time that COVID-19 hit. So it was difficult enough to get people, to ship them to the location, to get them working on these tasks, to also find the funding. And this is something I'll actually talk about in a second, to deploy these resources. And then also, when scaling up, of course, I mean, we ran the pilot on Microsoft Azure. And like I said, this was a very interesting public-private partnership model between both ministries and both companies. The pilot was funded by a grant from Microsoft, actually, an AI4Earth grant. So we did the pilot on Microsoft Azure, but then when scaling up to all of Egypt, the numbers are starting to look scary. So we'll have to find different alternatives for IT infrastructure to do this. But we're unearthing more and more challenges as we go. They are endless, but I think the results so far and the promise that this holds is enough of a motivation for us to try and overcome those challenges. What skills beyond technical ones did you find critical for this project to work? How do you get agricultural experts, farmers, and others to work with your data specialists effectively? That's a great question. It really helped to have the Ministry of Agriculture on board. It really, really helped because they are the domain experts, and domain experts, as most of you would probably know, are crucial in AI projects. You just cannot, no matter how good your data scientists are, you cannot rely on them completely because at the end of the day, to them, it's just data. It's just a mathematical model. They don't have the expertise to understand what's actually behind the data, and that's where you need your domain expert for. So it was absolutely crucial. We could not have done it without the partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture. The skills that we need, well, this is the first one, the domain experts. People who understand exactly what it means to plant certain types of crops, what it means to have crops at different stages requiring different amounts of water, who have knowledge of the area and the best way to delineate plot boundaries and so on. And also I won't call them low-skilled jobs, but the non-tech jobs of going actually on the ground, speaking to farmers, dealing with them, and collecting the data that we need. So it's it was quite a range of skills that we needed in addition to technology skills. And thankfully, in that particular area, it's an area where we run a lot of experiments for agriculture and a lot of pilot projects. So it was relatively easy to get the data, to get farmers working with people, but with technology experts and so on. But I imagine that it's going to be a challenge when rolling out the project throughout the whole country. But in general, having this, I won't call the middle person, but the domain expert who's able to translate the needs of the farmer to the technology experts is crucial. And we often have to go to our agricultural expert and say, how, we'd like to do this, or we propose doing this, and they would say, oh, no, but farmers won't like that. This is the way they do things. This is the process. Because you do need a proxy. Egypt has millions of farmers. It's impossible to connect with all of them. So I would say having that domain expert in the loop is extremely important. The other lesson is the one that I talked about regarding public-private partnerships and how to find funding for these types of projects, because they are quite challenging in terms of effort and in terms of expense. And we were lucky to apply and win this Microsoft grant. But I think it's important to really leverage the risk for the private sector, because quite often these AI and development projects are quite large and quite risky and quite low or late on ROI. So having government there with its kind of nation building mandate to leverage that risk as well for the private sector, and also to use the cutting edge technology for the private sector works quite well. What's missing is the third arm, which is the funding. And here I'm hoping that both the private sector through things like this Microsoft grant, but also through other funding schemes, and of course, crucially, international organizations will be interested in this type of partnership and in this type of project deployment. Next question, how do you ensure systematic learning from your pilot as you explore options for further application? Any interesting tools or approaches you can share? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure if we have any specific tools or any approaches yet. I think, obviously we've documented all the things that went wrong for the pilot, including the difficulty of deploying people to the ground to collect data, but also the specific resolution that we need for the satellite imaging. We're now also exploring the possibility of areas where satellite images are not high res enough and detailed enough. So what do we do? Do we deploy drones? Do we even use manual cameras and just deploy people in the field who can take those images? We're still kind of debating those types of issues. But yeah, we're trying not to repeat any of the mistakes that we made in the pilot. One of the interesting ones actually was that because we were so time bound because of the Microsoft grant deadline and the fact that it had to be deployed or used before the end of the fiscal year, so we had to start in, I think it was March or April, where not that many crops were being planted. So it was actually a very uninteresting time in which to do this analysis, but we managed to get around that. So one of the biggest lessons learned is to have this long-term analysis of when certain crops are being planted, so that even at the data gathering stage, we're at a stage where we can collect some useful training data. Next question, how do the ethical and regulatory challenges around the use of AI and data to drive policy play into your project, especially given that data literacy among rural populations is not always high? Yes, that's very true. And it's not so much of an issue right now because we're not really collecting personal data, but it will be an issue when we start deploying the virtual assistant. And in Egypt, we do have a strong emphasis on data protection and AI ethics. In fact, we're members of the UNESCO expert group that's currently drafting the first worldwide recommendation on AI ethics. And earlier in the year, we passed a law on data protection that is in line with GDPR. So what we're doing is first with the virtual assistant, we're definitely requiring informed consent. So no farmer will be able to use this without their explicit approval and understanding of what it is exactly that they're sharing. We're offering the opportunity to register. We have actually a digitization scheme called the Farmer's Card, which enables farmers to get a lot of subsidies and benefits and so on. So we're linking this project with the Farmer's Card so that people can be identified across the board and given the right incentives and the right type of help. And through that, we're ensuring that there is informed consent and the right communication of what exactly what data we're collecting and what it's being used for. I see I only have 2 minutes left, so I'll try to go quick. There are 2 questions. Do you have any social byproducts in the implementation of the pilot you might want to share? For example, increased awareness, training, and employment? Yes, definitely increased awareness, definitely the realization that technology can help, which is a big thing. And we're hoping that that learning will transfer across to the rest of the country as well as we roll out this project. But yes, many people weren't even aware that technology could help in these types of problems or give them useful insights as farmers. So yes, that's definitely one big one. How do you hope this edition of the Paris Peace Forum will support the work of your project? Well, obviously, knowledge sharing for us is great. So if anyone has thought of deploying a similar project or has thought of solving a similar problem using different tools, we'd love to exchange knowledge. Also, if you're interested in hearing about what we've done, what we're doing, interested in a partnership, we're all ears all the time. And with that, I think I have to stop, but thank you very much. I hope I answered the questions to some acceptable degree. Thank you so much again, and I hope to see you around the event today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.